Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, born on August 4, 1900, came from a well-respected family with deep roots in both England and Scotland. Her father's family, the Lyons, had held the titles of Earls of Strathmore and Kinghorn since the 17th century, with connections to Scottish royalty going back to the 14th century. Her mother's family, the Bowes, were equally notable, owning estates in County Durham and making their wealth through coal mining. Growing up in a world of privilege and comfort, Elizabeth's early years were filled with the love of her immediate family and the steady presence of their devoted nanny, Clara Cooper Knight, known as Alla. Alla was described as kind yet firm and played an important role in Elizabeth's early life, offering both care and security. The family home at St. Paul's Waldenbury was cherished by Elizabeth and her brother David. They considered their other estates, Glamis and Streatham, as places to visit rather than their real home. Lady Cynthia Asquith described St. Paul's Waldenbury as a typical English home, full of simple childhood joys such as charades, tea parties, and hide-and-seek. The relaxed atmosphere of this home lacked the strict rules often associated with such estates, allowing Elizabeth and David to freely explore and enjoy their surroundings. Elizabeth and David shared a close bond, spending time together and creating memories in their favorite hiding spots and play areas. Although their interests differed, Elizabeth enjoyed horses and parties while David was shy and less interested in these activities. Their companionship remained a constant in their lives. One of Elizabeth Bowes Lyon's early memories was of her grandparents' golden wedding celebration at Glamis Castle in 1903. Tragedy struck in 1904, with the death of Elizabeth's grandfather, which led to her father becoming the 14th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn. This change brought about shifts in the family's routine and living arrangements. Elizabeth's sister, May, noted the family's mourning period and the process of preparing their clothes in black. Elizabeth later recalled a constant sense of mourning during her childhood, reflecting the family's respect for traditions during times of loss. Despite the sadness, the family continued to enjoy their estates, adapting their lifestyle to include longer stays at Glamis Castle, Streatham, and Gibbside. The outbreak of World War I brought a significant shift in daily life and national priorities, as the conflict quickly dominated every aspect of society. The war was unprecedented in its scope and impact, altering the lives of people across Europe and beyond. Elizabeth's elder brothers, Patrick, Jock, Fergus, and Michael, were all enlisted or volunteering. The family transformed Glamis Castle into a hospital for wounded soldiers. This change turned the castle from a grand residence into a place of recovery and support. The dining room, once a venue for festive gatherings, was repurposed with beds for soldiers. Elizabeth's duties included knitting and organizing supplies, reflecting widespread domestic involvement in the war effort. A significant change for Elizabeth was the arrival of a new governess, Beryl Poignand, who replaced Catha Kubler. Beryl, a former teacher at a French school, quickly bonded with Elizabeth, and their relationship developed into a deep friendship. Beryl's detailed letters home offer a vivid glimpse into life at Glamis and Elizabeth's character. Elizabeth was described as lively and intelligent, with a keen interest in current events, which she followed through newspapers. Elizabeth's family wrote regularly, sharing updates from the front. Her brothers' back letters detailed their experiences in the trenches and training camps. Patrick and Jock, stationed in northern France, described the harsh conditions of trench warfare. Fergus, initially training recruits, eventually went to France, while Michael, stationed in Rouen, managed to keep a light-hearted tone in his letters despite the seriousness of his situation. Only a month after returning from Glamis to the battlefields, Fergus was killed at the Battle of Loos. Elizabeth's struggles with her studies are candidly reflected in her letters, where she expresses frustration with subjects like arithmetic, literature, and history. Despite her self-deprecating humor about her academic performance, she remained engaged in her studies with Beryl. A key event was the potential closure of the hospital at Glamis Castle. Elizabeth and her mother's efforts to save the hospital highlight their commitment to supporting the war effort. The family's relief and celebration upon Jock's return, along with their Christmas preparations for the soldiers, show their dedication and the ways they found joy and solidarity amidst wartime hardship. On September 16, 1916, Elizabeth Bowes Lyon experienced a dramatic day when Glamis Castle caught fire. She acted quickly, calling fire brigades and organizing efforts to save the castle's valuables, earning praise as a veritable heroine. In the aftermath, she helped with repairs while continuing to support the soldiers stationed at Glamis. The war's toll was personal, when her brother Michael went missing but was later found as a prisoner of war, bringing great relief. After World War I, Elizabeth returned to social life, receiving numerous marriage proposals but showing little interest. Notable suitors included James Stewart, a close friend and decorated war hero, and Prince Albert, who first met Elizabeth in 1920 and quickly fell in love. Despite two proposals from Albert in 1921 and 1922, Elizabeth initially declined, citing uncertainty about the relationship. However, their friendship grew through social interactions and letters, with Albert remaining persistent. Finally, in January 1923, after a weekend together, Elizabeth accepted his proposal. Their engagement was announced on January 16, 1923, to widespread public excitement. Elizabeth expressed some frustration with the intense media attention, but was warmly welcomed by the royal family as she prepared for her new role as the Duchess of York. In the days following the engagement, Elizabeth and Bertie handled a flood of letters and telegrams, spending time with friends and family amidst the public fascination. Their visit to Sandringham to meet the King and Queen was described as both challenging and successful, with Elizabeth impressing her future in-laws with her charm. Elizabeth's letters to friends and family conveyed her exhaustion and surprise at the engagement, while others, including her brother Mike and acquaintances George Gage and Archie Clark Kerr, offered their congratulations and in some cases expressed personal sentiments of disappointment or envy. At the wedding, Elizabeth's arrival at the Abbey was marked by a poignant moment when she laid her bouquet on the tomb of the unknown warrior. This act, possibly a tribute to her late brother Fergus, added a deeply personal and reflective note to the ceremony. Her wedding gown, a cream chiffon moire dress with silver lame accents, and her veil gave her a timeless elegance. After the ceremony, the Duke and Duchess of York made a grand exit in their scarlet and gold coach, driving through key London landmarks amid cheers from the crowd. In the public sphere, the Duchess's early days were a delicate balance of royal duties and personal engagement. Her public appearances, starting with the Royal Air Force pageant in June 1923, were a mix of formality and personal connection. Her engagements, including visits to Edinburgh and various charity events, helped establish her public presence. The press noted her evolving style, which reflected the era's fashion while showcasing her elegance. A significant event was her conversation with Winston Churchill on the 27th of June 1924, which influenced the Duke and Duchess's decision to embark on an extensive East African tour scheduled for December. Churchill's encouragement, followed by a supportive letter from the colonial secretary, facilitated the king's consent for the tour. In the autumn of 1925, the family faced a profound loss with the death of the Duke's grandmother, Queen Alexandra. Amidst the mourning, the couple experienced a joyful moment with the news of expecting their first child. The Duchess's pregnancy brought both excitement and discomfort, and they decided to move from White Lodge to Curzon House, reflecting the changes in their lives and the Duchess's health. Throughout her pregnancy, the Duchess continued to attend public engagements, although she began to scale back her activities as the birth approached. She traveled to various locations to support charitable causes and inaugurate new facilities, maintaining a strong public presence despite her condition. The arrival of their daughter on April 21st was a moment of immense relief and joy. The Duchess's labor was challenging, leading to a cesarean section, but both mother and baby were reported to be doing well. The birth of Princess Elizabeth was celebrated by the royal family and the public, and the choice of names, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, honored important family figures and traditions. As the couple prepared for a royal tour to Australia, the Duchess was concerned about leaving their infant daughter behind for several months. Additionally, there were worries about the Duke's stammer, which could complicate his role during the tour. However, Lyon-A, a speech therapist, began working with the Duke, and his therapy brought significant improvements, boosting the Duke's confidence for the upcoming trip. The Duchess faced the emotional difficulty of leaving her baby and managed the move with the help of Queen Mary. They spent Christmas at Sandringham House before finalizing their departure arrangements. In January, the Duke and Duchess embarked on a 6-month global tour aboard HMS Renown, a battlecruiser that had been refitted to serve as their floating residence. The ship was well stocked with a variety of alcoholic beverages and cigarettes, reflecting the Duke and Duchess's preferences. By 1929, the Duke and Duchess took up residence at the Palace of Holyrood House. During this period, the Duchess experienced personal tragedy with the death of her brother, Jock, from pneumonia. This loss deeply affected her, and she withdrew from public engagements to await the birth of her second child at Glamis. The arrival of their second daughter on August 21st was met with joy, and Princess Elizabeth was excited to welcome her new sister. Reactions to the birth were mixed, with Queen Mary expressing disappointment that it was not a boy, while the king found solace in having another daughter. Despite the challenges they faced, the Duke and Duchess of York remained dedicated to their public duties and family life throughout the early 1930s. Their new home, Royal Lodge, became a cherished retreat and symbolized stability during turbulent times. Their public engagements reflected their concern for those affected by the Depression, and they continued to support various charitable causes. The Duchess's involvement in the arts and charitable work grew. She supported organizations like the Camargo Society for Ballet and various charities for children and ex-servicemen. Her commitment to contemporary art and her support for the Housing Association movement showcased her broad interests and desire to contribute meaningfully to society. In their private moments, the Duke and Duchess found comfort in their family life and the beauty of their surroundings. The Duchess particularly enjoyed the tranquility of Birk Hall and expressed a desire for a more reclusive existence. She took a thoughtful approach to her children's education, hiring Marion Crawford as their governess. George Futh died and his elder son, King Edward VIII, becomes king. With the new king being unmarried and Queen Mary in mourning, the Duchess found herself taking on more duties and supporting Queen Mary, who became the central figure of the royal family. Despite these personal challenges, the Duchess remained active in her public life, continuing her support for charities and attending various events, such as the Talk H League of Women Helpers Festival and a tea party for the Imperial War Graves Commission. King Edward VIII's reign was marked by a focus on his personal life, particularly his relationship with Mrs. Simpson, which created considerable controversy and strained relations within the royal household. Despite the king's attempts to integrate Mrs. Simpson into royal circles, her presence and the accompanying scandal caused tension and unease. Mrs. Simpson's suspected sympathies towards Nazi Germany and the king's controversial actions heightened concerns among British officials. The king's decision to prioritize his personal relationship over public duties, including a scandalous incident at the Aberdeen Infirmary opening, further damaged his reputation. The idea of a morganatic marriage, where Mrs. Simpson would hold a lesser title, was rejected, reinforcing the need for a decisive resolution. From December 1 to 3, 1936, the Duke and Duchess were shocked by the news of the king's intentions, which became public on December 3rd. They were distressed by the scandal and its impact on their future. The king decided to send Mrs. Simpson abroad to escape scrutiny, and the Duke of York supported his brother while dealing with the personal and public implications. By December 6th and 7th, Prime Minister Baldwin met with Queen Mary, who was firm against a morganatic marriage. The king eventually decided to abdicate, confirmed in a dramatic meeting with the Duke of York. Negotiations for the abdication and financial settlement, including the estates of Sandringham and Balmoral, were tense and revealed the king's better financial situation than initially claimed, causing further strain. On December 10, 1936, the king officially abdicated. The news was delivered to the House of Commons and the public, and the Duke of York was set to become King George VI. Despite the distress, the family began preparing for the new era. The Duchess of York was ill and unable to fully participate in the crisis, but expressed deep concern and supported her husband, while Queen Mary was shocked and grief-stricken. Public opinion was divided, with significant backlash against the king and some unexpected support. As Edward VIII went into exile, King George VI returned to London, addressing a nation that needed reassurance. His accession council speech, delivered in a hesitant voice, highlighted his commitment to constitutional government and the welfare of the British Commonwealth, signaling his resolve to tackle the challenges of his new role. The transition was particularly difficult for Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, who had to adjust to their new circumstances due to the abrupt shift in their family's status. The change brought a new level of formality and public scrutiny to their lives. The Queen and King worked hard to adapt to their new roles and responsibilities. The move to Buckingham Palace was a difficult transition, marking a significant change from their previous, more comfortable residence. They focused on making the palace feel like home and established a new household staff. Their initial official engagements included a notable visit to the East End of London, aimed at countering rumors that Edward VIII's interest in the poor had played a role in his abdication. This visit, along with subsequent receptions, helped to solidify their public image and demonstrate their commitment to their new roles. The coronation of the King and Queen was a significant blend of tradition and innovation. The Queen's new crown, designed by Garrard and inspired by the regal circlet from Queen Victoria's era, featured 4 arches and included the Koh-i-Noor diamond. Queen's coronation robe was traditional yet splendid, made of purple velvet with ermine and intricate embroidery of British Empire symbols. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret wore their own purple velvet robes and ermine capes, while the maids of honor had white satin dresses with detailed embroidery designed by Norman Hartnell. The public preparations included extensive street decorations and local celebrations, reflecting widespread enthusiasm and patriotic fervor. On the day of the coronation, crowds gathered overnight to secure their spots. The King and Queen traveled in the Gold State coach, and despite delays and minor mishaps, the procession was a grand spectacle. Since the summer of 1938, Walter Monckton had been mediating between the Duke of Windsor and his family regarding his desire to return to England. While the Prime Minister was open to the Duke's return, the King and Queen were hesitant, particularly the Queen, who feared that the Duke might become a rival to the new King George VI. The Duke's dissatisfaction with family matters, including the dedication of his father's tomb, increased tensions. Meanwhile, the threat of fascism loomed large, and despite Neville Chamberlain's appeasement policies, there was significant rearmament and growing criticism from figures like Clement Attlee and Winston Churchill. The King and Queen supported Chamberlain, though the Queen had reservations about conscription and Britain's role in defending other nations. In late April and early May 1939, amid these tensions, the King and Queen prepared for a significant visit to Canada and the United States as a gesture of strength and solidarity, despite safety concerns. Even though the Queen and her husband hoped that Germany would avoid war, it was becoming increasingly clear that the Second World War was inevitable. The Queen gave her first wartime speech on Armistice Day, November 11th, in 1939. Although she had previously criticized women for taking men's jobs during the interwar period, she praised their efforts in her wartime speech. She acknowledged the contributions of women, whether they joined the army, worked in factories, or maintained households, and compared their courage to that of men. She addressed the emotional topic of evacuated children, expressing sympathy for parents separated from their children. The speech was highly successful, resonating deeply with many listeners. An anonymous letter from a mother whose son had joined the army highlighted the speech's impact. When your quiet words echoed in the room, you seemed to be speaking direct to me, and gradually I saw how much a little home meant, and how important it was to keep on carrying on. The Queen also delivered a similar speech in French to encourage French women after the fall of France, and spoke to the women of the United States on August 10, 1941, expressing gratitude for their help and highlighting shared values between Britons and Americans. When Germany began bombing cities, including London, the King and Queen remained at Buckingham Palace, their official wartime residence, despite the risks. They spent nights at Windsor Castle with their daughters but stayed at Buckingham Palace during the day. On September 8, 1940, a bomb hit Buckingham Palace. Although it exploded the next day, without causing injury or significant damage, a second attack on September 13, 1940, involved several bombs but resulted in no casualties. While the first attack was somewhat accidental, the second was considered carefully planned. The Queen wrote to Queen Mary, describing how they narrowly escaped injury when a bomb hit the palace. The King and Queen chose not to inform the Prime Minister of the details, fearing he would order their evacuation. However, Churchill was aware of the danger and noted that if the windows had been closed, the glass could have caused serious injuries. Ironically, the bombing of Buckingham Palace helped improve the King and Queen's public image, as it demonstrated that even the monarchy was not immune to the war's impact, helping to alleviate potential social unrest from the destruction of only working-class homes. The Queen and King visited many places who were bombed to boost morale and concern. The war also brought severe shortages and rationing of food and materials. German submarines attacking supply ships caused a scarcity of goods, leading to strict rationing. The Queen's household adhered to these rationing rules, and when she received a food parcel from American banker J.P. Morgan, she expressed her gratitude but noted that the cheese was a rare treat, reserved for industrial workers. Clothing and cloth were also rationed, influencing the Queen's wardrobe choices. Her dressmaker, Norman Hartnell, noted that she avoided dark colors and chose simpler designs to convey comfort and sympathy, reflecting the austerity of the times. Energy and fuel were similarly rationed. During a visit from Eleanor Roosevelt in October 1942, the Queen's bath had a black line marking the allowed amount of hot water. At Windsor Castle, only wood could be used for heating in common rooms, with minimal electricity allowed in bedrooms. These measures underscored the widespread impact of rationing on daily life. The end of the war in 1945 left the King and Queen, now in their mid-40s, visibly and emotionally exhausted. Their correspondence and diaries reveal the heavy burden they carried in the post-war period. The King's health, already fragile, worsened under the strain. Despite these challenges, the royal family strived to maintain a sense of normalcy and celebrate the war's end with public appearances and events like the Queen's birthday and the opening of Parliament, which were met with great enthusiasm. The Duke of Windsor, who had resigned as governor of the Bahamas, faced uncertainty about his future in England. The royal family was apprehensive about his return, particularly due to the Duchess of Windsor's strained relationship with them. Winston Churchill conveyed that while the King would welcome the Duke, Queen Mary and the Queen herself were opposed to meeting the Duchess, particularly after the Duke's press conferences during his visit. The Duke and Duchess ultimately chose to reside in France, avoiding a permanent return to England. In early 1947, amid severe winter conditions and ongoing rationing, the King and Queen, along with their daughters, undertook a tour of South Africa. The planned royal tour of Australia and New Zealand in 1948 was postponed due to the King's declining health. A successful operation in March 1949 to improve circulation in his leg offered some relief. The engagement announcement of Princess Elizabeth to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten on July 10, 1947, was a beacon of hope amidst global and domestic turmoil, providing a moment of joy and optimism for the nation. In 1951, as King George VI's health declined, Elizabeth and Philip took over many of the King's public engagements. The King's diagnosis with lung cancer and subsequent surgery marked a challenging period. His health issues led to a postponed tour of Australia and New Zealand, which Elizabeth and Philip undertook in his place. The King's death on February 6, 1952, while Elizabeth and Philip were in Kenya, marked a profound moment of transition. With Elizabeth ascending to the throne as Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen Mother's move to Clarence House was fraught with challenges, including dealing with criticisms about the costs associated with the move. Despite her dissatisfaction with the house, she eventually settled in and adapted to her new surroundings. Her personal losses continued with the death of her brother Mike in May 1953, further compounding her sense of grief. His death on the 1st May 1953 meant that Queen Elizabeth had now lost 5 of her brothers, all in youth or middle age. In her personal life, Queen Elizabeth navigated grief and responsibility. The death of Queen Mary in March 1953 and the challenges of her own new role as queen were significant. The Queen Mother's preparation for the coronation was meticulous. She wore a heavily embroidered dress by Norman Hartnell and adorned herself with a dazzling array of jewels. Despite the rain, she was warmly received by the crowds. The occasion was both an emotional high point and a reflection on the monarchy's resurgence, thanks to her and King George VI's efforts to restore its prestige. However, the joy of the coronation was soon overshadowed by a personal crisis within the royal family. Princess Margaret, deeply affected by her father's death and seeking solace, developed a close relationship with Townsend. The story of Princess Margaret's romance with Peter Townsend and its impact on the British royal family is a poignant chapter in post-war history. Princess Margaret, the Queen's younger sister, was deeply in love with Townsend, a divorced Royal Air Force officer. The affair became a source of significant distress for the Queen Mother, who had never previously dealt with such a crisis in her family. Her reaction was one of genuine shock and sadness, as she grappled with the implications of the relationship, especially given her belief in duty and tradition. The situation came to a head when the affair was exposed to the public during the Queen's coronation. The media scrutiny forced Princess Margaret to choose between renouncing Townsend or waiting until she was 25, at which point she could marry with less difficulty. The couple decided to wait, but the ordeal was emotionally taxing for both, and in the end, Margaret renounced Townsend. The Queen Mother, stepping into her new role as Counselor of State, was soon immersed in royal responsibilities. During the Queen and Prince Philip's extensive Commonwealth tour, she and Princess Margaret took charge of numerous royal duties, including Privy Council meetings, ambassadorial receptions, and investitures. The Queen Mother's passion for steeplechasing emerged relatively late in her life, though it soon became a crucial source of joy, particularly after the death of her husband, King George VI. Her introduction to steeplechasing came through Anthony Mildmay, a charismatic figure in the sport, who persuaded her and Princess Elizabeth to purchase a steeplechaser together. They acquired a horse named Monaveen, which turned out to be highly successful, winning several races. However, Monaveen's tragic death after breaking a leg deeply affected the Queen. Elizabeth's lifestyle was characterized by lavish consumption of chocolates, rich foods, and an impressive intake of alcohol, including spirits, wine, and champagne, which led to speculation about whether she was an alcoholic. Elizabeth's later years were marked by both personal and public challenges. The strains of the royal family's marital difficulties, including the separations of Princess Anne and Prince Andrew, were significant. The Queen's personal and public composure was tested during these periods, including the infamous Annus Horribilis of 1992. With Princess Diana, although she was in favor of the union and, according to some historians, understood and tolerated both cheatings of Diana and Charles, the Queen Mother lost the respect for Diana when she exposed the marriage to the public. Despite facing criticism and personal losses, including the death of her daughter, Princess Margaret, Queen Elizabeth maintained her dedication to her duties. Her longevity, celebrated with milestones such as her 100th birthday and continued public engagements, exemplified her enduring commitment to her role. The Queen Mother's death on March 30, 2002, at the age of 101, marked the end of an era.